I have a question for you. Biggest question of the day. How do you get away with murder? Now, we've all been sat around with our friends and had a similar conversation to this, where you come up with all kinds of crazy, elaborate schemes and different ways that you would get away with it. But I am convinced that in this day and age, it is almost impossible. We live in an era of surveillance and forensics. And amongst the Ring doorbell cameras and the ominous white CCTV units, there is an estimated 21 million surveillance cameras in the UK, making it one of the most surveilled countries in the world. But there's one man who did, and it wasn't that long ago. In November of 1974, a woman was beaten to death in the basement of a quiet townhouse in London. Her killer was identified almost immediately. He was a British aristocrat. He was a war hero. He was a gambler. He was a man who, after that night, was never seen again. Now, what makes this case so disturbing isn't just the violence. It's that over 50 years later, no one can say for certain whether John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, had died or escaped and lived the rest of his life out under a different name. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is William and welcome to the Baker Street Bureau, the place where we dive into the strange, dark and mysterious goings-on in British history. If that's something that you're interested in, take a second, click the subscribe button and ring that little notification bell. Now, the aspiring YouTuber waffle is out of the way, let's get down to business. Because this is the case of Lord Lucan, the only man in British history to truly get away with murder. Richard John Bingham was born on the 18th of December 1934. He was more commonly known as Lord Lucan, as he's best known for being the 7th Earl of Lucan. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with British peerage, an Earl is a high-ranking member of British society, sitting just below dukes and marquises, but above viscounts and barons. I know, we still do that stuff. The important thing to remember is that in British society, John Bingham was a bit of a bigwig. Bingham was born into privilege. His early life saw him evacuated to Canada and then on to the United States as the threat of the Second World War was approaching. Once the bombs had settled, John and his family returned to London to find their family home in ruin. It seems that the Luftwaffe didn't particularly care for British peerage. John went on to attend one of the most prestigious boarding schools in England, Eton College. During his time at Eton, John developed a particular taste for gambling. Sources state that John would often sneak off of school grounds to attend horse races and placed his earnings in a secret, not so secret, bank account. John then left school in 1953 to undertake his national service and became a second lieutenant in his father's regiment, the Coldstream Guards, and was stationed for the most part in West Germany, where he spent a large portion of his time honing his poker skills. During his early career after leaving the British Army, Bingham surrounded himself with people of similar interest and often won at games of skill, like backgammon or bridge, but often would offset his winnings with massive losses. Some sources indicate that some of his biggest losses ranged between £8,000 and £10,000, which in today's money is around £275,000 to £300,000, which, for my American friends, it's about $400,000. Lucan met his wife, Veronica Duncan, in early 1963. She was a talented artist, having discovered a keen eye for it at a very young age, and went on to study art in college. It was Veronica's sister who introduced her to London high society after she married into a family with very strong connections. One night, at a golf club function in the countryside, Veronica was introduced to Lord Lucan. News of their engagement had hit the tabloids as newspapers reported that the two were to be married on the 20th of November 1963. Only a few months after the marriage, John's father tragically died of a stroke. And in addition to his £250,000 inheritance, he acquired his father's title and became the 7th Earl of Lucan. The couple went on to have 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. After their first child was born, the Lucans hired a nanny, Lillian Jenkins, to help look after their firstborn. This freed up time for Lucan to try and teach Veronica about gambling and other high society activities like hunting, shooting, and fishing. He even bought her golf pro lessons in an attempt to bring her more onto his side of things. His daily routine would normally begin with a cup of coffee, reading the newspaper, and taking the dog for a walk. Afterwards, he would enjoy some afternoon games of backgammon at the Clermont Club, where he would then go on to change into black tie, where he would head back out to gamble late into the night. He was described by his friends as a shy man who often kept himself to himself, despite his very tall stature and desire for more masculine pursuits. His jet-set lifestyle made him very popular, as he would often fly private jets to races. He had an affliction for Aston Martins, and he'd even screen tested for a part in Woman x 7, which prompted him to later decline an offer from Albert Broccoli to screen test for the role of James Bond. That's right. A timeline exists where John Bingham could have been James Bond. Following the birth of their second children, Veronica had suffered from postnatal depression, and Lucan took a keen interest in her mental well-being. In 1971, he took her for treatment at a psychiatric clinic in Hampstead, where she refused to be admitted. Instead, she agreed to have home visits from a psychiatrist and a course of antidepressants. Slowly but surely, Lucan's gambling habits and lack of control over the family's finances, combined with Veronica's weakened mental state, began to put a huge strain on the relationship. Shortly after a stressful Christmas, Lucan moved out of the family home, and Veronica later described this as the point in which the two had formally separated. Divorce proceedings began, and Lucan was entirely focused on gaining custody over the 3 children. He was wholly convinced that Veronica was unfit to raise them due to her ongoing mental health challenges, and decided that the best course of action would be to spy on the family and document his findings. His car was often spotted outside the now family home on Lower Belgrave Street, and often, while Lucan was inside, he was wearing a disguise. He would go on to hire private detectives to take over his work, and would even attempt to have her doctors speak on record stating that Veronica had gone mad. However, the doctors did not bend to his will and stated that she was not insane. She was merely suffering from depression and anxiety. This was all in vain, as the courts sided with Veronica and awarded her custody over the children. Lucan was obsessed with the idea that Veronica should have no place in their children's lives, and worked tirelessly to create friction for her at every single turn. He told his friends and his bank manager that Veronica had been spending money like water, and although he continued to pay her £40 a week, he cancelled their regular food order with Harrods and delayed payments to the milkman. Veronica was also required by the courts to employ a live-in nanny, so he also stopped paying the childcare agency, knowing that it would cause problems. The household saw a string of temporary nannies that Lucan had driven out through one means or another. He befriended one of the nannies in an attempt to dig information from her, which he would then use against her. And another nanny quit after receiving a barrage of mysterious phone calls from a man breathing heavily. All of this came to a head in late 1974, when the post was given to Sandra Rivet. Described as a bright, intelligent child, Sandra grew into a life of care work and selfless service, having spent time working with the elderly, the orphans, and the underprivileged of London. She was no stranger to the challenging fabric of life, having had a number of unfortunate romances and even questioned her own ability to be a parent. Sandra was listed on the books of a Belgravia domestic agency after she'd recently been working with an elderly couple in the area, which is how she was discovered by Veronica and ultimately hired to help at the house. Everything appeared to be in normal order for Sandra, as everything she'd heard about the Lucans up to this point was just rumors. Until one evening, everything came crashing down. On a cold, dark night in November, at around 8:55 p.m, after putting the children to bed, Sandra asked Veronica if she would like a cup of tea. Sandra then proceeded to head downstairs to the kitchen on the basement level to make her one, when she heard the creaking of floorboards behind her. Slowly, quietly, and precisely, John Bingham had let himself into the house, armed with a lead pipe, and swiftly delivered a blow to the back of Rivet's head. The attack was brutal and calculated. John had wrapped tape around the lead pipe to help aid with grip, as he repeatedly crushed the skull of Sandra Rivet before placing her body into a sack and disappearing into the house. Curious about why it was taking so long to make a cup of tea, Veronica began to descend the staircase to see what was going on, when suddenly she was attacked from behind. As she screamed for her life, the unknown assailant in the dark told her to shut up. Veronica later claimed that upon hearing the voice in the darkness, she instantly knew that it was Lord Lucan. The two continued to fight, locked in a battle that made its way to the ground. Veronica bit his fingers, but John shoved her head into the floor. She managed to turn around under his body weight and delivered one of the most powerful moves in hand-to-hand combat. She grabbed him by his testicles and squeezed. John yielded at this point, writhing in pain, and relinquished his grip on Veronica's throat. Veronica went on to question where Sandra was, but Lucan was evasive at first. But after tying himself up in knots, he admitted that he had killed her. Veronica was rightly terrified and immobilized by fear, but knew John better than he knew himself. She had rightly assumed that giving John a sense of control would help her survive that night. So she told him that she could help him escape, but would need some time to heal from her wounds, so he could stay at the house for a few days. Lucan walked upstairs and sent his daughter back to bed, as she had awoken from all of the ruckus. John proceeded to place towels on the bed so the sheets wouldn't be stained with blood, and asked Veronica if she had any of her antidepressant medication. He went to the bathroom to fetch the drugs, along with a damp towel, presumably to clean up Veronica's face. This was the moment that Veronica had been waiting for, as she realized that John wouldn't be able to hear much from the bathroom. She made her escape with her remaining energy and burst into the streets, screaming for help. She made haste for the nearby Plumber's Arms pub, where she exploded through the doors and collapsed on the floor, stating that her husband had tried to kill her and had murdered the nanny. We can only assume that in this time, Bingham had realized his wife's absence and knew that he was going to get caught if he remained in the house. So he did the only thing that he thought would preserve him and made a getaway. Lucan's escape is somewhat hazy, as he may have arrived at the Chester Square home of Madeline Floorman, the mother of one of his children's school friends, sometime between 10 and 10:30 p.m. Floorman was alone in the house, so she didn't answer the door, but shortly after, she answered the telephone to a very incoherent voice and swiftly put the phone down. Shortly after, Lucan's mother received a phone call asking her to collect the children. According to the Dowager Countess, he spoke of a terrible catastrophe at his wife's home. He mentioned that he happened to be driving past and he saw Lady Lucan fighting with a man in the basement. In his account, he had entered the property and found his wife screaming. The location in which the call was made remains a mystery. However, Lucan did not stop there. He then drove to the home of his friend Susan Maxwell Scott in East Sussex. He arrived disheveled, pale, and clearly distressed. What would follow would later become one of the most important pieces of testimony in the entire case. Susan Maxwell Scott later told police that Lucan said, "I have done a terrible thing." He then claimed that he went into the home, he had discovered a man attacking his wife, that he intervened, and the attacker fled. He said he panicked. She didn't believe him, but she helped him anyway. When asked why she didn't immediately inform the police of Lucan's arrival, she said that she had not seen any news on TV or heard anything on the radio about what was going on. She simply opened the door to an old friend that was clearly in a bad way, so she allowed him to wash. She gave him tea, and then she drove him to New Haven, where Lucan abandoned his car near the harbour. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. A few days later, Lucan's car was found. Inside were a lead pipe and bloodstains. The police instantly suspected that Lucan had thrown himself into the water. However, after using tracker dogs and divers to comb the area, nothing of note towards the investigation was found. Oddly though, the police did discover the remains of a judge who had disappeared some years earlier. Forensics managed to establish that the pipe abandoned at the scene of the crime had a mixture of Lady Lucan and Rivet's blood on it. However, there was no direct way to connect the pipe that was discovered there with the pipe that was discovered in Lucan's Ford Corsair. The running theory was that the two pieces of pipe were cut from the same longer piece, and that the taping wrapped around it was incredibly similar. There was also a series of tests run on the blood in the car, which determined that it had the same AB blood group that was discovered at the scene. The newspapers reacted fast, with headlines such as "Body in a Sack," "Countess runs out screaming," and "Belgravia murder, Earl sought." There was a lot of media speculation around a meeting that happened at the Clermont Club where Lucan frequently gambled. This meeting was between friends of his, and the group later insisted that it was merely just a rational discussion between concerned friends. However, the police had been noted saying that they were working against them, and often described them as the Eton Mafia. The inquest into Sandra Rivet's death opened, and without realizing, history was in the making. Lucan was not present. He never would be. The proceedings would become one of the most extraordinary judicial exercises in British legal history. A murder inquiry with a named suspect who could neither defend himself nor be arrested. During the inquest, police read the statement that Veronica had given them on the night of the murder. "He attacked me from behind. I recognized him immediately. I knew it was John. He said nothing, he just attacked me. I managed to escape and ran into the street shouting for help." The forensic pathologist testified that Sandra Rivet had died from multiple blows to the head. The injuries were consistent with the repeated heavy blows from a blunt instrument. Death would have occurred rapidly. Police later questioned Susan Maxwell Scott after her husband had informed her of what happened at the family home in Belgravia. "He told me he had done something dreadful. He said he had gone to confront Veronica. His explanation did not make sense to me. I did not believe his account." This testimony was devastating. Not only did it contradict Lucan's versions of events, it placed him at the center of the crime, panicked, evasive, and seeking help. During his time at the home of Susan Maxwell Scott, Lord Lucan had written a letter to his brother-in-law, Bill. "Dear Bill, the most ghastly circumstances arose tonight which I briefly described to my mother. When I interrupted the fight at Lower Belgrave Street and the man left, Veronica accused me of having hired him. I took her upstairs and sent Frances up to bed and tried to clean her up. She lay doggo for a bit, and when I was in the bathroom, left the house. The circumstantial evidence against me is strong, in that V will say it was all my doing. I will also lie doggo for a bit, but I am only concerned for the children. If you manage it, I want them to live with you. Coots, trustees, St. Martin's Lane, Mr. Wall will handle the school fees. V has demonstrated her hatred for me in the past and would do anything to see me accused. For George and Francis to go through life knowing that their father had stood in the dock for attempted murder would be too much. When they are old enough to understand, explain to them the dream of paranoia and look after them. Yours ever, John. After reading the letters, Bill noticed that they were stained with blood. On the 11th of November 1975, the coroner delivered his verdict. His words were unambiguous. I am satisfied so that I feel sure that Lord Lucan murdered Sandra Rivett. I am satisfied that he attempted to murder his wife. This was not speculation. It was a formal, legal conclusion. Lucan was now, in effect, a named murderer, without trial, without a sentence, and without being present. Now, despite the extensive searches, no trace of Lucan was ever found. No body surfaced in the channel, no belongings washed ashore. There was no confirmed financial activity afterwards. The rumors began almost immediately. His wife, Veronica, believed that he had done the honorable thing and fallen on his sword, where others claimed that that would be the farthest thing from the truth. Another theory was that he was picked up by a group of shady underworld gentlemen that he had met during his gambling days, and they helped him escape. However, after realizing what he had done, they dug a hole for him and threw him in it, for fear that his recklessness would backfire on them. Sightings were reported in India, Africa, Australia, and South America. John Miller, a bounty hunter who had previously kidnapped fugitive train robber Ronnie Biggs, claimed to have captured Lucan in 1982, but that was later exposed by the News of the World as being a hoax. Scotland Yard tracked someone who they believed to be Lord Lucan all the way to the Indian city of Goa, but that turned out to be a chap called Barry Halpin, a folk singer from Merseyside. In 2007, reporters in New Zealand interviewed a homeless British expatriate whose neighbours claimed he was the missing Earl. Even within his family, there was no agreement. His son eventually applied for a death certificate, not because they believed that Lucan was dead, but because the estate could not be resolved without one. In 2016, the certificate was issued, and his son became George Bingham, the 8th Earl of Lucan. What makes the Lucan case extraordinary is not just that a murderer vanished. It's that he vanished cleanly. There was no confirmed sighting, no remains, no proof of death or survival. Just a woman murdered in a basement, a verdict delivered in absence, and a man who effectively stepped out of existence. And at the center of all of this is Sandra Rivett, a woman who went downstairs to make a cup of tea and never came back. Not because of chance, but because someone else believed that they were entitled to control everything. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is William, and this is the Baker Street Bureau, the place where we dive into the strange, dark, and mysterious goings-on in British history. And if that is something that you enjoy, please subscribe to the channel, ring that little notification bell. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are still here, please leave me a comment. Let me know if there's anything interesting that you want me to look at, and I will add it to my list. I promise you, I will look at it, and it might even make it into a video. However, in the meantime, if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.